If we really had a 30%, 33% unemployment rate, and we had that many people not earning an income in any way, we would have social unrest in this country that would make the riots a couple of years ago look like Mickey Mouse.
My next guest spoke Zulu before he spoke English. He grew up in a mud hut in Singa with no electricity or no running water, and has spent his life shedding light on what was historically an invisible economy. I call him the patron saint of the Kasi economy. He's the author of KASINOMICS and the founder of Minanawe Marketing, Mr. Gigi Alcock.
Hi,
Welcome to Dealmaker Diary.
thank you.
Gigi, for those in the audience that don't know you, paint a picture of what it was like growing up in Singa in rural KZN.
Cool. So Msinga, when I grew up, was one of the most violent and poorest places in South Africa. It's in the Tugela Valley. It's an incredibly arid, dry place. And it's basically the dumping ground for millions of Black South Africans who were removed from what was at the time white-owned land by the government in a process that they called verblanking, which was the whitening of the land. And people were forcefully removed and dumped in Msinga, and so a very highly overpopulated area, as I said, arid, one of the hottest places in South Africa. And my parents basically were community workers and political activists that built a mud hut with no running water, no electricity, and brought us up like Zulu kids. My mother taught us at home at a stone bench under an acacia tree. Our kitchen was another acacia tree with a gas cylinder under it. And I say we didn't have running water. We had lots of running water. We washed in the Tugela River, which flowed past our front door, basically. And we grew up like Zulu kids. We were very poor, but rich in terms of lifestyle and culture. We grew up stick fighting, goat herding, and as a result, we're basically no different from the Zulu kids around us. And yeah, that's kind of, and Msinga is it's still one of the poorest, most arid parts of South Africa. Hasn't changed a lot, but it's also the source of most migrant labor where people move to the mines. Yeah.
Okay. And your folks were Neil and, forgive me, is it
Krina.
Krina?
Yeah.
Your mom was Krina.
Yeah.
Could have had a different life.
Yeah.
Seemingly chose this. You said they were activists. I believe were landholders before that and gave that all up
Yeah.
to pursue a cause that cost your dad his life.
Yeah, so my father was a very successful farmer, owned many farms in Underberg, in the Drakensberg. And then, unfortunately for me, kind of had this epiphany when he was kind of in his late 30s, early 40s, where he chose to give it all up and basically start trying to change people's lives. He was anti the government at the time, and also built various organizations. One was called Kupugani, which means raise you up, which was a range of shops which sold low cost, high protein, high quality food to people in rural areas where there was a lot of malnourishment and so on at the time. My mother was a journalist who was sent to interview this crazy person, and he was being followed by the security branch at the time, who were harassing him all the time. So he said, "Well, I'll meet you in the botanical gardens. The security branch won't follow us there." And they met, and the rest was history. And and then they basically went through various phases of different places around the country where they did their work. And then they moved eventually to Singa when I was quite young. And he was a real thorn in the government side. And eventually in 1983, he was assassinated by a police, I guess, plot to get rid of him. And yeah, but my mother stayed there. She's in her late 80s and she still lives in the same mud hut, refuses to change her life, still washes in the Tugela River, and yeah, lives in that community still.
Sure. Wow, that's amazing. Wow. Yeah, it's a sad to hear about that, and the community was grieving terribly when Mr. Neil Alcock was, was killed.
So he's very much part of that community and is best friends with Mthembu Chief and Duna and Kulnu. And so he was, highly respected. And that's one of the reasons my mother stayed. My brother still works in that community doing the same work. Yeah.
And I read about how the community does the traditional honoring of the spirit as well.
Yes. So, yeah, in my book, Born White Zulu Bread, I wrote about how in Africa you have to return the spirits of the dead. It's a very important kind of transition. And the tribal leaders insisted we did the same for my father. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And now you're spreading the light of this informal economy
Yeah.
in South Africa, which is north of R1 trillion a year of money flowing. You've helped made it very visible with your books, the KASINOMICS series. All right. Tell us about, before we get into the numbers, tell folks about what do you do with your life now, and what does a normal day look like for you?
Yeah. So my normal life, I decided I was going to be a community worker as well, and I started my early life as an anti-apartheid activist. And in fact, to rewind a little bit, I said to my father when I was quite young, will you send me to university? And he said, I can not afford to send you to university, but I'll prepare you for life in Africa. And I never went to university. I've never done more than a very bad matric. But I do think that that kind of preparation for life in Africa was very important. And so I started off as a community worker, and then felt that there was something different, to better opportunities, and kind of went into business. And there's a long story of how I got into it. Uh, but growing up in poverty, I said I would never be poor again. So my life today is very different. I started a very successful business, Minanawe, yeah, my kind of passion is adventuring around Africa on my motorbike. So that's kind of what today is about.
Excellent. Fantastic. And you've grown up in the townships, so you see it through different lenses, and I pick it up in your books. There's such a depth in what you present. Paint a picture for, folks when they think informal economy, Kasi economy, they think poverty, shame, survivalist mentality, let's support them, when it's absolutely completely different.
Yeah,
What do people miss when they drive through the economy and see, these vendors around? What are they not seeing?
sure. Look, I think that the biggest problem is that we have these perceptions shaped by headlines, of poverty, of unemployment, and all of these kind of things. And yes, they exist, but they don't exist to the extent that the picture is painted of. And when people drive through a township or a rural area, they kind of see chaos and they see poor, suffering people. And the reality is actually that there's incredible happiness and there is resilience and entrepreneurship in those spaces. And there's also a lot of order and structure, which we don't see from the outside. People see this kind of chaos, and actually it's highly organized, highly structured. And I call it the other worlds. We have these parallel universes to our own that we kind of able to move in and out of, but kind of are on their own. And what we don't see is the amazing investment that people have invested in housing. I mean, you go into townships today, and they are suburbs, beautiful houses built with no form of formal finance. You go into rural areas, you have these huge homes, people sending money from the city to invest in them with pillars and, reflective windows and so on.
And Louis Vuitton drainage.
Louis Vuitton gutters and so on. So, and actually we should be celebrating that, because the majority of people don't live in an informal settlement or a shack. Only less than 13% of households live in a shack. The balance live in formal
That's
dwellings.
worth saying one more time.
Yeah,
What's it?
less than 13% of households live in a shack or an informal dwelling, and this is not a result of the government building formal homes. This is a result of people generating money themselves through informal businesses and investing it in extending homes, growing those homes. And you can go to any, if you go to an informal settlement, if you go, for instance, 10 years ago to a place called Bram Fisher, which is on the edge of Soweto near Dobsonville, you would have found rows and rows of shacks or RDP houses. Today, you go there, you will not find a single little RDP house or shack. They're all these double-story, beautiful homes and stuff. And that is this incredible investment people have made into shaping these places. And so townships have become suburbs. We have a very strong middle class in these places, and we also have a very, very strong what we call informal, but I hate the term and it doesn't really, it's not true to it, but this informal business sector, which is powering our formal economy, but also is powering the incomes at major scale within these township spaces. So that's actually when, and you know what happens is that when I tell people about this or they read about it, and then they go into these townships or they drive in rural areas, I get people saying, once I started looking, I couldn't stop seeing it. It's all around me. Um, and it's just a kind of aside. I had a guy who came to one of my conference talks, and afterwards he came to me and he said, "I own a number of clothing stores in townships and in township shopping centers, and you speaking rubbish." And he was holding my book. He said, "I bought your book." He says, "I'm going to read it and I'm going to tell you why I think you're speaking rubbish about how many of these businesses are out there." Anyway, about a couple of weeks later, I get a picture of a lady selling vetkoek outside a shopping center. So obviously the background is a shopping center. And I get the title. Uh, Hi, Gigi, meet Betty. Betty sells 3,000 vetkoek every single day for R1.50 each. Betty has her vetkoek stand outside my shop in Kailicha. I have never seen Betty before, but she has been there for 10 years. Thank you for opening my eyes to Betty. Then a few weeks later, I get another one, a picture of a young guy selling hair extensions at a little stand. And hi, meet Mandla. Mandla is in Umtata Plaza in the Eastern Cape. He sells hair extensions outside my shop. He says, "I have never seen Mandla before, but Mandla makes 15,000 Rand a month selling hair extensions. Thank you for opening my eyes to this." And this is the thing, is that once you start looking, you recognize the scale of this kind of activity. That here is a person who's had these businesses and never understood how much business there is.
Wow. Yeah. That's through your lenses. You helping us open our eyes. When did you first realize though that you know this is something that the world needs to know about? What prompted you to dedicate your life in studying the Kasi economy?
So primarily business. I didn't want to be poor,
Yeah.
but I guess the first time I realized the scale of this is I was very into whitewater kayaking, and I kayaked down the Tugela River from our home down to the river mouth. And kayaking down the river, it was in flood. It was very lots of adventures. But all along both sides of the river for hundreds of kilometers were dacha fields. As far as you could go, there were dacha fields and people tending these dacha fields. And I couldn't believe the scale of these dacha fields. And I was quite interested in it. And And anyway, so I stopped at the one side and I saw these women with a bag of dacha. In fact, they saw me and they ran away, and I called them back in Zulu. This was white person, thought it was a policeman. And they came back, and this bag of dacha was like an 80 kg, amazed me, bag, but full of dacha. And I said, "How much do you sell this for?" And they said, 5,000 Rand. And so I was like, that's a lot of money. And then I came back to Johannesburg and I went to the hostels, the Zulu men's hostels, where kind of I hung out with my local homeboys when I first moved to Joburg. And I asked, and they're the guys who sell it and traffic it and stuff. And at the time it was illegal. And so they said to me, and I said, "How much does a bag like that sell in the streets of Johannesburg?" It was 400,000 Rand. So from 5,000 Rand to in Msinga to 400,000. And then I bumped into a friend of mine who owns a tire dealership in the local town. And I said to him, "How's business?" He said, "My business is really bad." I was like, "Why?" He said, "The police had just burnt all the dacha fields." So I said, "Lionel, are you telling me that the uh, burning of the dacha affects the tire business?" He said, "I lose 40% um, of my business a week after the police have burnt the dacha," which suddenly made me realize it's incredible. First of all, the impact of this informal, admittedly illicit in this case, economy on the formal economy, on the tire business, because of course everyone's driving back and forth with it, but also the scale of the income. And I called it one of, I said, at the time, and I wrote about it in KASINOMICS, I said, this is the largest brand in this country with the best distribution network. And the brand was Durban Poison, one of the best known brands without a logo. But if you look at that model of that dacha, and then you look at any other business sector, and you look at whether it's the taxi sector, whether you look at the spaza sector, whether you look at the township fast food sector, we have exactly the same thing as we have these very large business sectors. And just looking at it through this lens, you started opening my eyes to all these other sectors and understanding the fact that because they were not visible didn't mean that they didn't exist, and that because they weren't recognized as contributing to the formal economy didn't mean that they weren't massively influencing that formal space.
Absolutely. So, for the audience, the term Casinomics, define it for us.
Sure. So I wanted to change this dynamic of what the informal economy means, because the perception informal implies unstructured, small scale, subsistence, survivalist, low tech, low income, low profit, and all of these things. So I called it Gasinomics, which is the word become the cool word for the township. Gasi is now like I'm a Gasi boy, Gasi girl is the cool thing. So I called it Gasinomics, but the reality is Gasinomics, or the informal economy, if you want to call it that, is all around us. It's in suburbs, it's in inner cities, it's in rural areas, it's in townships, and so on. And I think the important thing about understanding Casinomics is that when people think of these economies, I say township, they go, oh, spaza shops or hawkers. And the reality is you got to understand the breadth and the depth of this space. First of all, in terms of depth, you have everything from, yes, you will have a hawker who's just making do, all the way through to a business where people are making hundreds of thousands rands of profit a month. And so that's the depth of it we need to recognize. More importantly, in terms of the breadth, is that if you take a mirror to the formal economy, you'll find every single business sector represented. So you will have, for instance, yes, you have the spaza sector, 190 billion Rand a year sector across 100,000 outlets. Then you have the what I call Gasikos, the fast food or out of home food sector, 50,000 outlets doing 90 billion Rand a year. The taxi sector, those taxis we know and love, they're 50 billion Rand a year across 250,000 taxis. We have the beauty sector, 60,000, what people call saloons or salons, doing 10 billion Rand a year. Even the muti sector, traditional herbal medicine, is 18 billion Rand a year sector.
The real estate sector, the rentals.
The rental, backroom rental is South African households earn 30 billion Rand a year. from backroom rental, what we call amaroom, which are generally micro rental flats. The spaza shops, 70% of the spaza shops are Somali, Ethiopian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi, and they rent their shops from South Africans and pay 25 billion rand a year in rental for that. And we could go on, and so we have these multitude of sectors. Auto sector, 80,000 Gasi mechanics and panel beaters. The Stokvel, or what I call a society, the savings Stokvels, 50 billion rand a year, and so on. So we have, you know, and when you start looking at Gasinomics like that, and you understanding the range of sectors, you start appreciating the scale of it.
Absolutely. So at that breadth and depth, last check was around north of R1 trillion, right? A year. That's about
So,
$70 billion a year.
so on the figures I have access to, which is not the total sector, that's R1 trillion a year sector. Now, put that into perspective. It's larger than our mining and agricultural sectors added together. But I say it's R1 trillion. There's a group called Finscope who recently, in November 2024, released their report, which comes out every 4 years. They claim the informal economy is worth 2.3 trillion rand. So you choose a number between 1 trillion and 2.3. It's probably halfway between those.
Now, you've seen that sector since 1994 grow 7 times, while the so called formal economy has sort of flatlined.
Yeah, so I mean that sector is booming, and it's one of the reasons. So my book, Gasinomic Revolution, came out after Gasinomics, and the reason I said that, I said there's a revolution happening in the sector. In 2014, I wrote Gasinomics, and at the time, no one believed it was there, and challenged it. And by kind of 2018, when Gasinomic Revolution came out, there was this blowing up of this sector, so and I think it's been driven from various different influences. So one of the things is, as the formal sector has slowed down, or not, create enough growth for more jobs and incomes and so on, people have looked to alternatives. That's the one side of it. The second part of it is that interestingly, the foreign spouses sector, those Somalis and Ethiopians, they entered the spaza sector as the South Africans exited it. And the South Africans exited it because of the entry of formal retailers, ShopRite, Pick n Pay, Spar, these shopping centers that were placed in townships. Suddenly, the South African spaza shop could not compete. So there was a sense that the informal sectors in decline, the spaza sectors dying. The Somalis and Ethiopians arrived racing away from Black Hawk Down and Mogadishu and so on. And they took over these shops, and they converted these little spaza shops into proper supermarkets, well priced, wide ranges of stuff, and started actively competing with ShopRite. And suddenly, the South Africans were like, hey, hang on, there's a business here. It's like the business is not in being formal, there's informal. So, in an obtuse way, the Somalis and Ethiopians going into the spaza sector revived the realization of the fact that there's business to be had in these businesses. I think the third part of it is that what we also saw an acceleration was over COVID, was all the people who were working in the formal sector were sent home during lockdowns. The people who were running a little Gorda fast food outlet carried on doing business. They closed the front, but they were selling out the back, and they were doing a booming business. And so there was realization that formal, 8 to 5 jobs aren't as lucrative as they're made out to be. And so a combination of these factors has meant that increasingly we're seeing people even leaving formal jobs and starting informal businesses. And a multitude of the people who are very successful in this space are people who've left formal jobs to run a bakery or run a Gorda outlet or a mechanics business and so on.
paint a picture. The foreigners, so-called foreigners, the Somalis, Ethiopians, Pakistanis. You mentioned, currently what we're seeing in South Africa with our president's 5 point plan to regulate migration or immigration. Uh, do you see an impact? Yeah, is this going to cause an impact in terms of room rentals, commuters, if the undocumented foreigners are leaving?
Yeah. So I think we have to be careful. We have to talk about, we have to distinguish between illegal foreigners and of course that line is blurred in terms of the populace. So first of all, if we look at the spaza sector, no impact. In fact, the spazas and what I call spazarettes, supermarket type outlets, the owners of those outlets are so entrenched in those communities, and that's part of their success. They lend, they give credit on food items to the social grant gogos and mothers in the last week of the month, which we call Mambara Week. Average Spazarette will have a book of between 20 and 30,000 Rand in loans with no interest on those loans. So they're seen as a lifeline in that last week of the month. They are in walking distance, so they save people the cost of taking a taxi to a formal retailer, and they supply a wide range of very well priced goods and so on. So we find in the average, I wrote in Gastronomic Revolution about a guy called Solomon. Solomon is an Ethiopian trader with about 4 different stores around Soweto. And I mean, he speaks perfect Zulu, and he's part of these communities. And when someone dies in the community, they make a donation to the family and so on. So they understand the cultural elements, and so they're very entrenched. When it comes to kind of manual labor, lower end, people who are working in the formal sector, I think that the impact is probably will be felt more among the non-SPAs and non-business foreign traders. The people in business, whether they're vegetable sellers or spaza shops, are very entrenched in these communities. They're providing a service, they're earning an income from their own efforts. I think where the impact may be felt is around people doing like manual labor, people, gardeners. We also find the impact on the inner cities, not in the townships, where these immigrant communities are kind of more insular. They're not part of those townships. But the impact is going to be very low in terms of the balance of the people. I think if you're a waiter in Sandton from Zimbabwe, you're probably going to face much more stress. But if you're a spaza shop owner in Soweto, life carries on very successfully.
Okay, so no impact in the biggest component of that trillion rand economy. What about things like commuters and backroom rentals, maybe? Is that popular with the immigrant communities?
Well, so backroom rentals is big within immigrant communities, but now we have to be careful when we talk immigrant, because if you look in the Western Cape, a large portion of the immigrants are South African immigrants who've come from rural Eastern Cape or come from the Northern Cape. We see a lot in Gauteng, was people who renting are people who've come from Limpopo and Mpumalanga looking for jobs in Gauteng. The majority of that business is actually South Africans. But yes, of course, there'll be an impact. And certainly in some areas, if you went to Diepsloot is a very, very high proportion of Zimbabweans, Malawians, and so on. A township like that will have that impact. But in most of the townships, and Alexandra Township as well, very high level of Zimbabweans, Mozambicans, and Malawians. But most townships, people exaggerate the numbers of foreigners in the township and in that gastronomic economy.
Good. We're going to start with the big FMCG companies. Have they managed to successfully crack the code of KASINOMICS?
Look, if you look at it in totality, no. and they continue to struggle to access that space. And I think it's almost like, at first it's ignorance, then it's denial. There's no way it can be as big and represent such opportunities. And then it becomes recognition. And then they have no idea of how to do that. And then they try and do stuff and make an absolute failure of it. So, I've seen this across a number of things. But w- outside of that, there are companies who've done incredibly well in that space. I mean, if you look at and then people like Exemplar, the shopping center, the listed shopping center business, they've understood that townships and rural areas represent a major opportunity for shopping centers. And they have opened in the craziest little rural towns that people would imagine have no capability of creating proper turnover for a shopping center and doing very well. People like the Vugile Property Fund, also the township and rural shopping centers doing very well, and they've recognized that and they've grown that footprint. So that's on the one side. Then Capitec has broken the mold, and I've worked extensively with Capitec, particularly helping them launch their informal business, what they call emerging market bank account, and then what they call the entrepreneur account. And they recognized relatively soon that there was an opportunity and approached me to help them on that. But they very quickly understood there was an opportunity and did stuff there. Companies like Pep, very astute, understood that sector. They have companies within their business we call like Flash, who have, say, I think 140,000 devices on spaza shops, salons, taverns, counters doing airtime data sales, also card acceptance, and so on and so forth. Uh, so there are a few. There are companies like South African breweries, pioneered, a township with alcohol. Uh, and then there's, people like, for instance, Coca-Cola were given a hiding by people like Kingsley and Twizzler and Refresh, which were startup businesses that launched soda brands and energy drinks into a space that Coca-Cola didn't see or couldn't really access. To a large extent, the people who've been successful have been the independent startup businesses who've either then been acquired but they've specialized in getting into that market and built massive businesses.
Okay. I was speaking to a former executive on from one of the big FMCGs, and he read your books as well. And they tried to crack the code. And he tells me for two reasons they failed. One was the lack of data, couldn't really work out the volumes, the package size, and what works, right? And the other one was the distribution and the reliability of getting that distribution right. And I read in your book, Kasi Revolution, where you spoke to, I think it was Hassan or Ali or one of those traders.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and his
yeah.
story of, hey, Shoprite can't beat the prices I'm getting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, her son, I told the story there of he's got a place called Morsel Cash and Carry in Tembisa, and at the time, was turning over 250,000 rand a day. I mean, I'm talking almost 10 years ago now. Today, he turns over more than 1 million rand a day. And I was with him the other day. I mean, and he's made his place huge. But I said to her son, "Who supplies you, her son?" He said Kingsley. He said Clover, 'cause Clover have a very good distribution system called Masakane that they built in house. And he said, "That's it." I said, "Tiger Brands?" He said, "No, no, they don't supply me." He said, "I went to Tiger Brands." And I said, "Would you supply me directly?" And they said, and he wasn't looking for credit, he was paying cash. He just wanted them to supply him direct. And he said, "They came here, they looked, they said, 'No, you do a lot of our products.' They said, 'We can't supply you because you don't have offloading facilities.'" And he said, because they park the truck on the pavement and unload that truck, they said, "No, we can't do that." And I mean, 10 years later, Tiger now trumpets the fact that they are, going into, and they are being successful, but it's 10 years late in a way. And I mean, here's the juxtaposition to this. I profiled a business called Twizzler, started by a guy, Ken Clark, in KASINOMICS Unleashed. And Ken was a dairy farmer, and eventually, for long story short, started this business called Twizzler, which was a Coca-Cola type, soda business, soft drink business. And he said, I said, well, what was your success? He said it was supplying these wholesalers, these Somali wholesalers. He said, Gigi, we used to have this policy that you had to have a forklift for us to deliver a certain size truck there. He says the one wholesaler in Tembisa, and I swear it's the same guy, but I don't know. He said the one wholesaler said, I don't have a forklift, but don't worry, we'll unload your vehicle in 10 minutes. He said, we've got a video of the vehicle stopping there, and they unloaded that vehicle in 4 minutes. He just had a line of laborers and they just unloaded that truck. 4 minutes they unloaded. He said a forklift would not unload that vehicle in the same amount of time. But that illustrates the difference between a guy like Ken and Twizzler, who were prepared to supply these guys and make a plan, versus a Tiger at the time who was saying, no, you need to have offloading facilities.
So, they're probably their very own restrictive internal policies, right?
And that's the code. The cracking the code is that I use the example of I launched Parmalat cheese slices in the townships, and built a 3 billion rand a year business
Golden
for
slices.
Parmalat cheese slices. Yeah, and it was yeah, but so at the time, and still to that day, Parmalat had no distribution. But we recognize that the informal distribution that existed there, the wholesalers like a Hassan, what I call MIDI wholesalers, that there was a multitude of these wholesalers. And then the formal wholesalers, people like Devland and KitKat and those guys, supply into the space. We just had to create the demand. And then the township Bakkie Brigade, the Spicer shop was going to get a Bakkie, and he was going to go to Devland or to Soweto Cash and Carry, and he was going to make sure that he organized the distribution. Success did not rely on you being able to do that distribution. Success relied on creating the demand, creating the relationships, and then the system will do the rest for themselves. And I think that's the important thing, is that companies, the other thing about data, there's always data. But what people are looking for is they're looking for an ironclad business case. And there's no such thing as a business case. Ask Steve Jobs if he had a business case based on data to launch the Mac or the iPhone. And this is the reality. You have to create a hypothesis, and then you have to innovate by making certain assumptions, getting the data that's there, and then there's a certain time you're going to have to make the leap of faith, and only the brave are successful.
You got to take those formal economy lenses off.
That's right. Yeah.
And see it for what it is. Yeah. And it's almost as if with that in mind, if you're now, let's think of the SMEs, the family-owned FMCG manufacturers or the farmers.
Yeah.
What should they be thinking about tomorrow morning if they want to crack into this 190 billion rand a year sector?
Well, it's a trillion rand a year sector.
Trillion. Sorry, I'm talking about the spazas only.
Yeah, no,
trillion.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
but I'm thinking, I'm focusing still on FMCGs. I'm thinking about the farmers, the value chain of foodstuffs and that.
So let's just talk farmers. So the Joburg fresh produce market turns over 9.5 billion rand a year. 60% of their turnover goes into the informal sector, according to the Joburg fresh produce market. So 60% are, and there's 18 fresh produce markets in the country, and I can guarantee you 60% plus is going there. So it just tells you the size of that sector.
Like the one in City Deep and those ones, right?
That's the one in City Deep.
That's the one, yeah.
It does 9.5 billion rand a year. 60% is informal trade, and you go there. I mean, it's an amazing place. Now, that just tells you what impact that sector has on the informal economy. Now, If you look at just the Gorda sector, Gordas is this quarter loaf of bread with slap
I
chips
know
and
bunny chow.
bologna, and yeah, it's like a bunny chop. Uh, and so the Gorda sector is huge. That's where I built the 3 billion rand a year Parmalat cheese slice business. Now they use substantial amounts of potatoes. One guy I know as an example, his staff peel 80 bags of potatoes a day by hand. Now, if you ever think you got a shitty job, that, but now
Of the big bags, how many
yeah,
kilos we
of the
talking? Because
big bags of potatoes. Yeah. So anyway, I've been approached by been approached by a few farmers, and one in particular said to me, "I want to supply that market." And I said, "Yeah, sure." Said, "I can introduce you to Gorta outlets, and there's probably 4,000 Gorta outlets in Soweto. Maybe you do half of those, or even a couple of hundred, and supply them." He said, "No, no, no, no. I want to bring my truck and park it outside the edge of Soweto, and they must come to me." And that's the problem. So to answer your question, if you are prepared to first of all understand that market, build relationships with the people in that market, the business people, and then understand how to create a fragmented, disaggregated distribution model, you'll be hugely successful. And there are farmers who do that, who know, and I know of a few who've done it, but it needs hard work and it needs relationships. This is, Ken Clark would tell you, he'd say, "I knew this guy and that guy, and he knew them by name." And, there's a brand called Mayo, which is a frozen yogurt, which was launched by a crazy Irish guy. And he called it Mayo after Mayo County in Ireland.
okay,
And
the
the
I heart mayo.
I Heart Mayo was their slogan, and it was a sticker, bumper sticker, that his wife bought at a curio shop and brought back, and he thought it'd be a perfect. And now you go around every township and you find I Heart Mayo. But he went off and he supplied these wholesalers direct. He knew who the wholesalers were. He'd go and spend time with them. When corporates were taking people on golf days, he was going and meeting them and taking them to a restaurant in Marabastad in downtown Pretoria and stuff like that, and built his business like that. And in many ways, with a corporate, we've lost this thing about relationships. Uh, we talk about CRM, and stuff like that, but we don't apply it when it comes to these kind of economies. And yet, one of the biggest things is about understanding them and creating the relationships with them.
The mayo story continues though, so that's something that the big guys got right. Is Danone right? Has
Danone bought
bought
it.
it, and
Yeah.
it's still a huge
Yeah,
success.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, it's very successful. I think initially they decided they would focus it more on the formal retail space, and then they realized that no, 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 wholesale was where to go. Yeah, it's a great
And
product.
they tried to tamper with the formula a little bit, right?
That's
When they
right.
weakened it.
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was I was
So yeah,
reading
yeah,
reading your book.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other things that people do is they and here's one of the biggest lessons for me. People talk to me all the time about affordability. And affordability is a killer in this space. People are not looking for affordable products. They're looking for high quality, high value,
Convenience.
and convenience is more important. But people appreciate quality, whether it's in taste of a product, whether it's in flavor, whether it's in delivery, whether it's in consistency. People in these communities, they cannot experiment with something that if you buy a new let's say you buy a new canned pilchards, and you open it and you eat it and it's terrible, you can't just throw it away and then go and buy another one. You live with your purchase and the mistakes that you've made. So people are very risk averse. And this is one of the reasons that brands are so important, that they represent consistency, quality, value, and all of these kind of elements. And people make the mistake of saying, "I'll provide a cheap, low quality product at scale, and it's not the way to go.
Wow. And also the sense of community. You talk about how familiarity, and the need for like, you know, uh, the founder of Mayo to be there and build relationships is so important.
Yeah, so I mean, community. Remember, these are very viral spaces. The word spreads fast, the negative and the positive, and so community is this, kind of, and community is small. Community is a street, a suburb, a church group, a stokvel, a school, and these, are spread the word very quickly, and so part of trust is about how do communities relate to you, and so I think that this understanding, in Zulu they call it umphakathi. Umphakathi means the insiders, and so community is about the insiders, and if you can belong within those communities, you're equally an insider, and then you're trusted, and then you're supported, and so on.
Before we go on, I should tell you I started this channel to share the real stories behind the climb for the next generation of leaders and builders coming up. Now, if that's something you believe in too, please subscribe and come along for the ride. It's free and it means a lot. Okay, let's continue. So, for a new investor with, call it, 50,000 Rand, let's say as an example,
Yeah.
what's your recommendation? What should I think about tomorrow in terms of a business plan if I want to tap into this economy?
So first, choose a sector, an industry, be it beauty, be it construction, be it auto sector, and so on. Don't look at this as a kind of amorphous mess. The second part is go off and spend time understanding that. Go if it's something you want to sell, a frozen yogurt. Go and sit in a spaza shop in the corner and watch people walking in and out of the shop and talk to the owner of that shop, because nothing beats that intimate understanding of that environment. And so spend your first 10,000 rand just having a good time, visiting people's homes, making friends, and so on, because that understanding, and it's not research, it's not percentages, it's a granular understanding of the space. And so those would be the two things: choose a sector and then understand that sector. Understand what are the pain points, what are the friction points. If you're doing distribution, where's the friction lie in getting a product to land on the shelf? When it comes to packaging, what is the right kind of packaging, as example, and what works, what doesn't work. So these are these friction points and pain points are the ones that you want to understand and then solve for, and then spend the rest of your money fulfilling what you've experienced. And it's insane. People will spend millions on research, but they'll spend no time on insights, on walking the streets, on visiting a spaza shop or buying a gorda. And so I mean, I did a lot of gordas. I ate a lot of gordas before I suggested cheese slices, and put the cheese slice on and tasted it and said, "Oh, this is delicious with a cheese slice," and chatted to the owner of the outlet and said to people, "Hey, try this here," and slapped a cheese slice on the gorda, and they were like, "What's this?" And like, "That's cheese. What's cheese?" And after that, then I was like, I knew. Then I don't need that business case. I watch people's faces when they ate the steaming hot vet cook at 5 in the morning in Soweto. It's freezing cold, and you slap in a cheese slice and it melts, and you can hear the angels singing. I know then it's going to sell. I've just got to get it onto that hawker's table when they're selling their vet cook. And that's unheard of. And it seems tragic that that's not the kind of work we do in terms of understanding these spaces.
But you also had a deep understanding about what cheese means in an economy like that. A cheese boy is
Yeah,
someone
cheese
who
boys
is,
and cheese girls. Yeah.
yeah, somebody who is well to do.
But at the time, there was no such thing as cheese in the township, not in any format. And in fact, rich black kids were called cheese boys or cheese girls because they were the only people who got it.
So coming back to this, you know, young investor with 50,000 Rand, thanks for that guidance. What are the typical sort of pain points or blind spots, rather. Let's call it that, that you should look out for, that most investors are getting wrong in that, SME space?
I think that the that we dumb down solutions. If it's I see a lot of people will say to me, "I want to start a wallet for this township space." I'm like, that's going backwards. Actually create a financial services product that's similar but more appropriate, like a card on your phone, as an example. Everyone's got a smartphone, or a different a high-end bank account. Look at Capitec's bank account. It's a really, really sophisticated bank account for the person who's the lowest income person. They have the most sophisticated banking account, and people appreciate it. Don't dumb it down. Don't make it low. Don't go with affordability. People will pay more if they get more. Also, I think that very, very importantly is that the practical things like distribution uh, and those kind of things are your least of your issues. If you create the right product, be it a financial services product or a food product, if you create it right, it's packaged right, you say right quantity, and so on and so forth, uh, all you have to do is market it. Get it into people's mouths, get it into their hands, get it onto their smartphone, and the rest will happen from there. People will find ways to get it onto the shelf. The spaza shop will find ways because there's consumer demand. That's the most important thing is focus on the right fit, right product, right fit. And it's not dumbing it down. It's not the cheapest product. Often it's a more expensive product and more sophisticated product.
Good. That's an important blind spot.
Yeah.
Okay. Any others?
Yeah, look, I think it really does depend on the sector that you involved in.
Which is your recommended sector, given where we are now?
So I think that the spaza retail sector is overtraded. Um, it's overtraded in the sense that it's a very mature kind of sector. I think that the fast food sector, what I call gasikos, which is casual
Ipleti.
dining, ipleti, amapleti, the quarters, it's a huge sector. So it's not it's and shisanyamas, you have amapleti, you have chicken dust. Chicken dust is delicious. And so a full range of these kind of food sectors that also you'll have burgers and so on. But the food sector in the town is 100% South African owned, which makes it a lot easier to deal with the guys. With Somali doesn't really speak that good English in the spaza shop, and he's foreign, he's not trustworthy. A South African's quite different. That sector, the tavern sector, which is moving increasingly into food, more restaurant type environment, those sectors, I believe, is a huge opportunity. They're high margin sectors, growing fast. The South African, as I said, the other sector is the tavern kind of restaurant sector. The other one is beauty and personal care. Beauty and personal, I mean, a fun fact. According to Hollard Marine, the most stolen imported product in South Africa's ports is wigs and hair extensions. Booming. Lashes, nails, perfumes, wigs and hair extensions is a growing sector.
Brazilians,
Brazilians.
which we need to define for the audience, because
Exactly.
the story about how your wife giggled when you.
Yeah. So when I came home from doing, I was doing some work for a company, Godrej, which is a multinational in the hair sector. And I came home and I said to my wife, "You won't believe how many women in the townships have Brazilians." And my wife, who happens to be white, said, "Oh, that's very interesting." I said, "When you feel them, they feel real." And she was like, "What?" Needless to say, my wife had a very different idea of what a Brazilian was to the ones I was feeling. So,
Same word, different meaning.
absolutely. And there's a lot of, that kind of what I call colloquial English that's very important to understand.
Meanwhile, the folks in South America are smiling at both. What the hell is that?
So yeah, beauty, personal care, hair, that kind of sector. I think the other sector is in construction, home construction. I mentioned earlier the scale at which people are building, home decor. Uh, I've advised PEP in the past, and one of my recommendations was that the home decor space was going to do very well. If you look at PEP Home now, they are running rings around all the other home places, and they're focusing very much on understanding what's the design and decor items that people want in that township space. So design, decor, home decor, and then probably the lastly would be the auto sector, particularly auto repair, auto panel beaters. A lot of the e-hailing guys now, repair their vehicles with Gasi mechanics and Gasi panel beaters. Can do it overnight, and you find they're quite sophisticated. These guys, so supplying them with parts or panels or and so on. I think that auto sector is going to do very well.
So, uh, Gigi, the Spaza food security and for foreign ownership debacles and debates have gotten a lot of attention on the headlines. And you said there's a lot that they're missing. Tell us, delve into that a bit.
Yeah, so the tragic kind of poisoning of kids, particularly in the townships, what is it, a year or so ago? And I think the tragedy is that it was literally leapt on, and it was like there's outdated food, counterfeit food that's poisoning the kids in the town. Now, first of all, most spaza shops are really clean, good looking shops. Of course, there's a few little um, like in any sector, not great ones. The biggest problem was that actually the poisoning came from turbifuros, which is a uh, very deadly pesticide. Now, in the townships, we have an incredible rat infestation problem. And it's primarily caused by the fact that the municipalities have collapsed and there's very little waste removal. And where waste removal does happen, then the waste taken and dumped on a piece of wasteland and so on. And so there's this, so, there are now township businesses, a guy Jabulani in Soweto is an example, who just gets rid of rats. And he'll do crazy things like they put a steel wool in your ceiling because apparently the rats, when they run on the steel wool, it's sore on their feet. So then they go to the next door neighbor's ceiling. But they use this poison. And so actually this poison is basically contaminated food in homes and probably in some spaza shops. And after all the hysteria was gone, the Minister of Health, Elias Mutsuleri, said no, they had done these clinical tests and the kids had died from tuberculosis poisoning. Of course, no one went off and said, okay, sorry, we blamed all the spaza shops, counterfeit and outdated food. And it remains a problem, and for some reason, the government hasn't cracked down on this poison. Uh, and I think that, the reality is that, as I said earlier, even at that time, there was very little, the impact on the spaza ret, the clean, sophisticated spaza who's lending or letting people buy food on credit. There's no impact on them because even the local community recognized the difference between this home and another one. But this is one of the problems, these misperceptions, these urban legends. And I'll give you an example. I was asked by Coca-Cola to assist a few years ago. They had a red top and red writing on their 1.25-liter bottle. And then it came out that there was lead in the ink that they use for the red writing. So they stopped using the red ink and they made white ink and a white cap. And the word went around the townships that the white writing and white cap was counterfeit Coke that was being made in a factory in Mayfair by Somalis. And it was poisonous, and you shouldn't drink that Coke, or it was hazardous. And Coke came to me and said, how do we convince people that actually this white labeled white cap Coke is the real thing? And that just gives you an example. I mean, I don't know if there is an answer to that, but the point was is that here was a genuine product that had been changed for a specific reason, the lead in the dye, or print, and immediately it just became that this was thing. And so we have to be very careful because we have these urban legends, these stories, which are perpetuated, which are not true. Uh, and um, and I think the reality is that the community know this is that not true, and so they don't really, respond to it in many cases.
Mm. So this will this informal economy ever formalize, or is that just part of Africa's culture?
So first of all, yes, they are already formalizing rapidly. I mean, just in terms of cash, cash is declining dramatically. That you cannot go to a Spicerette now, that you cannot go and tap your card to buy your groceries. Card acceptance has proliferated, particularly driven by the ability to tap a card on devices like Shop to Shop. Shop to Shop has done an extraordinary job in taking a VAS device, which was selling airtime and electricity, adding card acceptance. And probably 40 to 60% of the average turnover in a Spicer shop now is card, or payments is card. The same in the tavern environment, the same in the beauty sector, the same in the fast food sector. You can go to Tembisa and Soweto. We did this exercise recently with one of the banks I'm working with, and you can have not a cent in cash, and you can buy at a Gorda outlet. You can, anything sub 50 Rand, they won't accept a card. So you can't get on a taxi, you can't buy a couple of apples, but you can buy Gordas, you can buy a beer, you can get your hair cut, particularly in my case, and so on, just tapping by card. So that's the first step of formalization. But I talk to hybrid formalization. That actually one of the important things that needs to happen is that these businesses must not and should not and do not formalize the parts that make them successful, and they should formalize the parts that do not have a negative effect on their success. And I use an example of a hot dog stand in New York. Now, hot dog stand in New York is an informal business. It's on the street in Times Square, out in the open, but it's formal in the sense that it's got the rights to operate from there. It has a permit, and so it has security of tenure. Security of tenure means the Metro Police can't come and chase you off the street in the Times Square tomorrow. It means that if you ever want to sell this business, you can sell the rights to this piece of street that you have. Um, but if you move that hot dog stand away from Times Square and you put it in its own little concrete building away from where the traffic is, it would die. Equally, a container selling quarters in a busy street is going to die when you say, okay, no, we're going to put it into a formal building and it's going to be 2 kilometers away from where everyone walks, which is often what government do. They build these like, this is a hawker market, but the hawker market's a couple of 100 meters away from where the people walk. So that's the concept of hybrid formality versus informality is that formalize the things that are important, security of tenure, getting permission and rights to operate in a certain place, moving to cash, supply of things like water, electricity, waste removal. We need to formalize those, and many of those the municipalities are responsible for, and are doing very badly at in the townships. And then leave the informality to remain. The fact that people are doing a quarter instead of a burger, and a fekkoek instead of a croissant, and so on. Those are the elements that you need to juxtapose. And most of the larger businesses are wanting to formalize and wanting to grow. I had a chapter where I spoke about scale up, not startup. The opportunity is that how do we enable these businesses to scale? There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of businesses out there. There's not even an opportunity to start a new vetkoek stand in a street in Soweto. Just the space has been taken where the opportunity exists. So it's not about how do we create more entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are there. It's how do we scale them up? And part of that is formalizing elements of that.
Right. And the perception of what would you say to those that say, oh, but this big economy, but they don't pay tax, they don't pay for electricity.
Yeah.
What's your
Yeah. So I've got a chapter called "To Tax and Not to Tax" in my latest book because it's a big question people ask. So first of all, I work with a township bakery, Tulip Enterprises, who do, about 2,000 loaves of bread a day. And they have pay-as-you-go electricity. And Wendy Machava, who owns Tulip Enterprises, she pays 18,000 Rand in pay-as-you-go electricity. She has desperately tried to get, connected to metered electricity. The point is that she pays and she says there's no way you cannot pay when you run a business because you can't even get illegally connected, because if you get illegally connected and they catch you out, your business is dead. So people are paying for those services and they recognize the importance of doing that. So when it comes to tax, we have to define what are we talking about. Are we talking rates and taxes, UIF, PAYE, VAT, fuel tax, profit on business, PAYE, and so on and so forth. So I think we tend to just lump it all into one thing. Having said that, so let's look at VAT as a starting point. That 190 billion rand SPISA sector is paying VAT, but they do not claim on that. They do not claim VAT because they're not VAT registered. It's an 80 billion rand a year net benefit to the fiscus from unclaimed VAT. So do we recognize that? The other
yeah?
tax is a fuel levy. So the fuel levy, if you just consider the taxi sector, that's a 50 billion rand a year sector. And I did a calculation just in terms of what's their, how many kilometers they travel. I think they travel 19 million kilometers a year. And if you calculate the fuel they use, they pay about 5 billion rand a year in fuel levy. And that's excluding the Bucky Brigade and other sectors. So tax is being earned. Then we've got to consider the impact on the formal economy. That those spaza shops who are buying from Unilever, Tiger Brands, Parmalat, and so on, they are generating massive income and profits for those businesses. And their tax that they pay on their profits would be substantially lower if this informal sector wasn't there. And so, we need to consider that. I think that the last thing is that people tend to say, well, people aren't paying tax and that's not helping our society and so on and so forth. If we really had a 30%, 33% unemployment rate, and we had that many people not earning an income in any way, we would have social unrest in this country that would make the riots a couple of years ago look like Mickey Mouse. We would have malnutrition, we'd have hunger, we'd have more people living in shacks. The reality is that, my argument is that real unemployment is closer to 12 to 15% because of this informal economy. And so imagine the social stability that's created by having this. That people are buying quarters with cheese slices, they have chrome gutters, they've got beautiful houses and stuff like that. This is creating stability, which is far more important than just a simplistic thing of saying, people aren't paying tax.
Another myth bust.
Absolutely, yeah.
Gigi, can you name one academic or expert out there that disagrees with your read on the economy and what do they get wrong?
There's probably many people who disagree with me, both among the academics and business sector. Having said that, there's been a recent paper by Harvard and Professor Harun Boret from UCT, who's basically saying that uh, the informal sector in South Africa is very small in comparison to equivalent economies. And their argument is that unemployment would be closer to 9% if we had an informal economy which was equivalent in scale to to our peers in the same kind of economies. And I think they're 100% right. And they say, that in essence, the informal economy would boost employment dramatically if we had such a big economy. Uh, and um, and I think that the theory is 100% true. Where they have it wrong is that what if our informal economy is bigger than official statistics say? And my argument is that, I mean, the amusing part about it is that the business sector agrees with me. People like Gerry Fourie, ex-CEO of Capitec, agree with me that the informal economy is much bigger than anyone realizes. The Exemplar and Vugile Property Fund, the guys building shopping centers, agree with me that this informal economy. The academics, however, claim that no, it can't be as big as it is. So we're in disagreement about that. Where we are in agreement, I think, and it's an important contribution they've made that says that actually unemployment would be 9% if our informal economy was as big as Gigi says it is. Which then goes back to my number of 12 to 15% real unemployment. If the informal economy is as big as I say it is, then yeah, we don't have the unemployment problem we have. And I think that the trick is um, the academics say we need more data. We don't have enough data, but I'm saying there is the data. Gerry Fourie at Capitec says I have 3 trillion data points from my 25 million customers. And so the business sector has this data, but it's not academically peer reviewed, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Gigi, can you name one government policy that is making life for these informal traders more difficult? And what would you change if you were talking to the minister?
So the biggest problem at the moment, and it's not a policy, it's a failing, is around infrastructure in the townships. The electricity load shedding has not stopped in the township. They just call it load reduction because of the infrastructure, the infrastructure not being able to keep up. There are between 2 and 4 hours of load shedding every single day in Soweto as we speak. Water gets switched off for days on end. The municipal waste removal is not done. So, just on water and electricity, can you imagine the impact of that electricity? With load shedding, there was a schedule. So, a bakery in Soweto could look at the schedule and they could be, with load reduction, there's no warning. Halfway through baking your 2,000 loaves of bread, the power goes off. And so, a fast food outlet. So people are shifting to gas and other alternatives. But spaza shops will tell you that, they can't sell Cokes because they're lukewarm. The meat in the freezer is defrosting and so on and so forth. So that infrastructure, water is obviously a major issue if you've got a business and so on. So backroom rental, I mentioned 30 billion rand a year. People are struggling. They've got these units built and there's no waste, and sewerage is a mess. And so they're not able to rent out their rooms. So you can imagine the impact on that. And so, I'd be saying to the government, particularly the municipal thing, is that we need to focus on these townships in terms of infrastructure, water, electricity, sewage, waste, water, I think I mentioned, and so on. That is where we urgently need to apply the infrastructure, which will then allow these businesses to not only operate with less disruption, but allow them to scale. How do you scale if you don't have that?
So it's less of a policy issue, more of a service delivery.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is that being addressed, or is there more to be done?
Not even vaguely. It's getting worse, if anything. I was in Tembisa the other day, sewage in the streets. It's a shocker. And you think you've got the problem in the suburbs, you multiply it substantially, and I think the problem for me is less how it affects households. Yeah, households make a plan. They get a generator. Most people have a JoJo tank in Soweto, for backup water. But for a business, you just can't operate like that. And so these businesses are under massive pressure. And these are businesses that are employing people, that are generating incomes and stuff like that. And so what is the limiting factor? You've got all these fancy exercises that were done through load shedding saying the impact of load shedding is 3% of our GDP or something. Do the same exercise in the townships and calculate the impact of that, and you'll see a substantial impact. And it's just the drag effect and not enabling those businesses to grow.
Now, is there an opportunity in that for the private sector to
Yeah.
to make up for this service delivery failure, or
Yeah.
is it a risk factor for somebody looking to invest in this?
Look, I think it's an opportunity in things like solar. Solar is at its infancy in the township spaces. It's clearly an opportunity in terms of backup water and stuff like that. But it's not at the scale. And in fact, the shopping centres. Exemplar recently in their financial statement said they spent, I think, 120 million rand on solar on their shopping centres around all their rural and township shopping centres, so that they could, in essence, be off grid. Now, where's the opportunity? Maybe Exemplar should be selling electricity into the township as well as retail space. I think it is an opportunity, but it's a less it's the municipal infrastructure is very difficult for the private sector to address, and so yeah.
I'm gonna, in closing, let's play a little game. Fill in the blank for me here. The entrepreneur who truly understands the Kasi economy in 10 years' time will be,
Rich
and you,
and successful.
like you. Gigi Alcock, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate, and I'm going to go and continue reading your series now of books.
Thank you
Thank you
very
for your
much.
time. Really enjoyed it. If you've made it all the way here, you're exactly who I made this for. Do me one favor, please. Subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation. It's absolutely free. It'll take a second and it'll mean the world to me. I'll see you in the next episode of Dealmaker Diary.